Well, Cosmic Fire, Love and Blessings. What I wanted to do is I was moved to do a reaction video on a video by someone called Crystal Ball. And Crystal Ball, she is, I would classify her as being on the progressive or left side of politics. And what's really interesting is that the the premise that she's bringing forward here is that she's reacting to a response that comedian Bill Burr offered to one of his viewers, one of his listeners, who classified themselves as being right wing. And so what Crystal Ball does here is I think that she presents a really interesting take, a very compelling take on capitalism versus socialism. And this all stems from what Bill Burr talks about. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to listen along, and then I'm going to pause and jump in and share the perspectives that are coming forward. So let's have a listen.
All right, Crystal, what are you taking a look at?
Well, friends, when we look at problems on this show, frequently they circle back to one dictate: follow the money. You can think about the 2008 financial crash, the Iraq War, the politicians that sell us out, the addiction crisis, the hollowed out industrial Midwest, the war-hungry military-industrial complex, the lying partisan media, the climate crisis, all the way down to, let's say, Kim Kardashian scamming her fans in a crypto scheme, or Tua Tagovailoa sent back into the field to risk his life after suffering a concussion. Risking it all. Why? Because the coaches and NFL brass care more about the almighty dollar than about the human beings whose lives and health they've been entrusted with. Now, normally, when we talk about these issues, I'll talk about the corrupting influence of money. I'll inveigh against the dangers of putting profits over everything else, including health, family, peace, and human life. But there is a name for the system that puts profits above any other value, and the name of that system is capitalism. Now, you might call it unchecked or unfettered capitalism. You might argue that we're just doing capitalism the wrong way. Perhaps. But at the core of all these issues, which have been allowed to fester and grow into a destabilizing, possibly world-ending mess, is capitalism. And specifically, capitalism of the type ushered in by the Reagan, Clinton, Bush, Obama neoliberal era. Now, I've just found out I have an unlikely ally in my assessment of the situation, comedian Bill Burr. Take a listen as he responds to a message that he received from a conservative fan who was upset that Burr had favorably mentioned socialism.
Last week you mentioned you don't know why people demonize socialism. I was really taken aback at that statement. Oh, Jesus Christ. Every country that has tried socialism has failed, and it's responsible for tens of millions of deaths. All right, so would you say capitalism is working? It is not, when what is it, 99% of the wealth is in fucking 2% of the people's hands?
Okay, so this is a really good initial response from Bill Burr, because immediately when we consider what's being presented to him, that somehow socialism, this word, this term that has a definition in the mind of the person who's brought it forward, he's stepped away from discussing the nuances around the word socialism, whether that's democratic socialism or Marxist socialism or even communism. He stepped away from that because there is an inherent challenge with the use of this word socialism, that depending on who's using it and the intention with which they're using it, they could be coming across really to use it as a weapon. So typically the right wing is using the word socialism to align the more progressive side of the population, of the mainstream, to this idea of communism, which in the mass consciousness, going back to the 50s, the 60s, decades now, there are many dear souls who associate socialism as being a bad thing. And so because that programming has been laid in, because it's embedded in its grooves of belief in these dear souls, they are influenced by this word socialism. And now what Bill does is he turns around and he says, okay, so let's forget socialism. How's capitalism working out? Well, let's carry on and listen to what else he has to say.
All of these tent cities, you're telling me this is working? You don't think capitalism is responsible for tens of millions of deaths? Anyway, Russia, Germany, China, Cuba, and most recently Venezuela have tried, or right now are socialist countries. As far as I know, whatever Cuba was trying to do, we prevented them from doing with an embargo or whatever the hell we did. We've been with them for 60 years. So I think you're looking at what a lot of people do is you look at your own country through rose-colored glasses, the same way you look at your own sports team, oh, my team doesn't cheat, what your team does, you're really sort of looking the other way with what capitalism has done to other countries. All the sweatshop labor, all the wars we fought over air quote freedom, where most of it is about, natural resources. All of these countries where we've gone in and, stuck in heads of the government that are going to do what we want to do so we can take advantage of them. To sit there and look at capitalism like it's, I don't know, dude.
It goes on, but.
So before I continue on and we listen to what Crystal has to say, this is a really important thing that's happening here, because Bill Burr as a comedian he has a pretty mainstream appeal. I think as a comedian, he reminds me very much of George Carlin. And George Carlin as a comedian, going back decades before he made transition, was really reflecting truth to power through comedy. And I believe what is happening here, Bill Burr is doing the same thing. I very much feel that there is a sort of commonality between Bill Burr and George Carlin. I think the way that Bill Burr is, where he's coming from, is actually a more, I suppose, realistic from a mainstream perspective response that he's giving. So his commentary is much more, I think, actually more balanced and maybe even more to the left side of things. And he is more willing to sort of call things out. So now what's interesting is that now Bill Burr has put this really simple, I suppose, reflection or position where to someone who said, oh, socialism doesn't work, the left side politics don't work. Look at all these examples. He stopped and he said, now hang on, you are coming from a place where if you're going to advocate for socialism, well, let's look at it sort of like its opposite, capitalism, right? And let's examine that. And guess what? When you are examining socialism, you are doing that examination, you have that position because of many reasons, because of the conditioning that you had as a child, your parents, your schools that you went to, the village, the town, the city, the region you grew up in. All of those beliefs are entwined. And that is very much a challenge for those in the mainstream consciousness. Okay. So let's hear what Crystal has to say, because I think Crystal's definitely moving in a direction that's more in alignment, but there are some things that I would say can be very much a step further when we look at this through a metaphysical lens.
By the way, mocking the listener for pointing out ills of communism that have all been replicated under capitalism, things like racist scapegoating, government surveillance, genocide, destruction of the middle class. But a really key point here that I think is worth reiterating is this idea from Burr that we look at our own country and our own systems through rose-colored glasses. We've been schooled our whole lives in the worst of what happened under authoritarian communists, primarily the Soviet Union, of course. And I am not here to stand for any authoritarians on the left or the right, nor am I interested in rewriting history with regards to the failures of full-scale government central planning. But what Burr is saying is absolutely true. We're trained to keep blinders on when it comes to seeing the ills of American society, which are in part, at least, caused by capitalism.
Okay, so just to jump in on this one, I think there are two really important points here. I think the first point concerns where are you on your metaphysical journey? Where are you in terms of your own awareness? And within that you can unpack that in terms of, well, where are you in terms of how you've shed the layers of conditioning, right? Now, there's a spectrum for the spiritual seeker. There's a spectrum where when we first begin to awaken and we first begin to realize that the physical world that we see, the outer world, the world where we look at these sorts of stories and these conversations and these reported events unfolding, they're very much perceived by each of us through our own system of beliefs and biases, right? And those beliefs go back to our childhood and to other lifetimes. And so what's happening here is Crystal's making a good point, as is Bill Burr, but I want to sort of just extend that a little further. When you're on the metaphysical journey, it then becomes an opportunity to observe these events and to ask yourself, okay, so if I have a particular reaction, particularly a reaction that is emotionally charged, I feel strongly about something, or if there's something that someone says that triggers me, what that does for the spiritual seeker, or what that should be, is that should be an opportunity to pause and to really ask, okay, so what beliefs are alive in me that stimulated or triggered that emotional reaction? Because that shows me the work that I have to do. Now, I say that because from the metaphysical perspective, emotion or emotion is energy and motion in the feeling body. And so if we have beliefs, for example, that socialism is really bad and it's evil and it's never worked out, when we hear about efforts for communities, for governments, for countries to engage in caring for the elderly, for children, for the vulnerable in society, that we may get triggered by that, because the idea of caring and the idea of kindness and the idea of helping others isn't actually how the mainstream systems of control are set up. That's not the priority. Caring is not the priority. Whilst that's one point, I want to listen to a bit more and then I'm going to come back.
There's in DC a new museum. It's called the Victims of Communism. And I wish I was kidding when I tell you that the park right across the street houses a sizable homeless encampment. Dozens of tents lined up, people suffering with mental health issues, addiction issues, all sorts of things have been chewed up and spit out by our society. Many days you can see these victims of capitalism literally sitting on the steps of the Victims of Communism Museum. I cannot think of a more perfect encapsulation of our cultural blindness to the rot caused by our own system, which we live with every single day. But since it's the water that we swim in, sometimes we just can't see it. Let's just do one super clear example here of what I mean, which is to dig into the opioid addiction crisis. Now, you probably know the outlines of the story. We've covered it a lot here. But basically, the Sackler family, owners of Purdue Pharma, start selling Oxy, pushing it as a non-addictive painkiller. That assessment, by the way, that it was non-addictive, was based on basically nothing and given a rubber stamp by a government regulator who then went and turned around to work for Purdue Pharma. There's that almighty dollar again. Doctors who get frequent visits and goodies and trips and dinners from pharma reps, they start prescribing Oxy for kids who get sports injuries, laborers who suffer from chronic pain, and its use becomes commonplace, especially in places that were devastated by job loss thanks to capitalism. The Sacklers knew almost immediately after that drug was introduced in 1996 that Oxy was addictive and was being routinely abused, including being crushed and snorted, that doctors were sometimes selling prescriptions, that the drug was being stolen routinely from pharmacies and then sold on the street. But they did worse than nothing. They buried the evidence. They doubled down on that popular drug that was making them billions of dollars, pushing it rather than backing off. We all know what happened next. We ended up with the worst overdose crisis in our nation's history. Deaths from opioids skyrocketed as those who started with Oxy switched to heroin and then fentanyl, leaving behind a trail of misery, pain, and death. Now, you could say the Sacklers are evil. No argument for me there. But in another way, they're also totally unremarkable.
Okay, so I want to jump in here because I think I sense and I feel it's really important to really differentiate a few things in what's being unpacked. I think the example of the victims of communism and the victims of capitalism, I think that's fantastic. I think it's a great irony and paradox. Now, what's really interesting for me is when she uses the word, or you could see them as being evil. My perspective, I've replaced the word evil with iniquity. The idea of iniquity being a lack of equality, or the dear souls are not treated the same. So whenever I hear the word evil, I replace it with iniquity. And the reason why is there's all sorts of baggage around words like evil, around words like God. And so I replace the word God with I am presence, for example. And this is all personal preference. And each spiritual seeker is going to do this. But what's really interesting and what's really important here, and I want to just jump over and just go to cosmicfellowship.com, and I want to show you something. I'm going to go down to click on search, and I'm going to go I am statements. I'm going to search, and that shows there are currently 6 records right now that are in here that have I am statements in. What I wanted to draw attention to is if I go and I'm going to click on just one of these, and I'm going to scroll down, and on this record here we go. So at the end of a library statement, if a master or if a cosmic author has communicated I am statements, they're pulled out of that discourse, out of that expression, out of that channeling, whatever it would be, and they're pulled into a specific section for I am statements. Okay. Now, one of the things I'm immediately called to do is when I think about the Sacklers or whoever it is, those dear souls who have forgotten the truth of who they are, for me as a spiritual seeker, it's really important that I don't dwell on their imperfection. I don't dwell on how they're evil. What I do is I dwell on the fact that They are an individualization of the divine, of the I am presence that has lost their way. And so my reaction is different from Crystal's in this case. Crystal's offering what would be a mainstream perspective where religion, as a part of a political show such as theirs, Breaking Points, they wouldn't be talking about religion or spirituality. It makes no sense, okay? However, when I hear that, when I hear the idea of the Stacklers, who, the owners of Purdue, that were in effect pushing these opioid drugs that were incredibly addictive, that led to countless deaths, the karma they incur, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. The karma is incredible. And so ultimately, I don't want to dwell on their karma, because law of the circle, the I am presence, God, it's covered. It's really important that I don't sit there and judge. I don't focus. It's not for me to focus on how evil they were. It's really important. But for me in this moment, the reason why I'm sharing this particular section of I am statements with you on Cosmic Fellowship is I really see that that's now my opportunity to look at that mainstream perspective. And as I witness that, rather than to focus on how evil something is, I turn around and I'm just drawn to this one here about worldly conditions. And I might, pick this affirmation or this I am statement or make my own. But I'm just going to read through this to give you a sense of what I feel called to call upon and affirm as I am witness to worldly events such as this. Beloved I am presence, beloved ascended host, beloved cosmic fellowship. I demand all the sacred fire from the ascended master's octave that is required to prevent this iniquity being imposed upon life any longer for any reason. So feel into that, look at those words, right? Really connect. And this is the invitation here. Connect with what's being said. There's something very important that is happening in this video from Crystal Ball, because even though Crystal doesn't have that spiritual emphasis, and I don't even know that she would consider herself religious. I've never seen any take on that. She might not even consider herself spiritual. I have no idea. But I do. I consider myself spiritual, and I consider myself a child of the divine. And what I mean by that, there's a divine spark in everyone through everything. I believe in God, that I am presence, and that I am presence is through me. It's through you. It's operating through Crystal, and it's operating through the Stacklers. And so this is the opportunity, right, for us to be observing these events and to do so with focusing upon the divine spark that they are, the I am presence that they are. And that my calling now, when I witness both the events at the time, when we're seeing what's going on in politics or big pharma, the entertainment industry or media or in education, whatever the fields might be, it is for us to respond and to observe and to turn to our tools. And that's really what I wanted to sort of focus on today.
They are creatures birthed by capitalism, a system that is designed to put money before lives. After all, they were far from the only ones who got in on this multi-billion-dollar grift. Johnson & Johnson, McKinsey Consulting.
All right, so this is another really good point, just sort of like to bring this to a close on. There are dear souls who have lost their way, and there are dear souls that have lost their way over many, many lifetimes. And this is millennia, this is aeons in the making, right? And so what we're witnessing right now is the death throes of these, I suppose, collectives of dear souls that have lost their way, that have come together. Some might call them fallen angels, some, whatever label it is that you might have, that there was a cosmic drama that was unfolding, and I'm going to get into that in another video beyond the scope for today. But when we look at what's being presented there, what's being highlighted, look at all of these groups. I just think about McKinsey, for example, in the top left of the screen there. McKinsey is one of the highest profile business management consulting shops in the world, like organizations. They consult at the very highest levels. And look what they've done there. They have settled for nearly $600 million over their role in the opioid crisis. And yet the existing mainstream government turns to organizations like that. So we're seeing this corruption now. We're seeing this iniquitous energy this iniquitous focus, this focus that is not about caring for all, as Crystal put it really well, that capitalism is about putting money, the love of money, ahead of the love of life. And so what we have now is, when we look at all of these stories, not to get lost in the emotional reaction and that energy of being angry or indignant. That's not going to help. That's going to shift you out of balance. My reaction in this moment, actually, as I was watching this video, being called to have this video coming forward, even being called to contemplate and to ask that I am, why is it I am called to be watching these kind of videos? And I watched this video, and at the end of it, it just became blazingly clear. Well, I have an opportunity to share a perspective around what this video is saying and what it's revealing to us, and just to share my particular perspective, just one particular perspective of reacting to a reaction of the mainstream through a metaphysical lens. And that's our real opportunity here when we look at these events, to really pause, to look within, to connect with the I am presence. So whatever it is we call our higher self, right? And to connect and to ask to be guided, or the term that I like is qualify, to qualify, to reach within, to reach to that higher self, and to ask, okay, so what is it that I need to know here? Because I'm not interested in getting caught up on the emotional roller coaster of reaction. I'm not interested in getting angry. I'm not even interested in joining a crowd and protesting, because the energy in the mainstream crowd of a protest right now really won't be conscious to an extent that I feel will really be coming from a place of love everyone the same. I have no interest in getting out a megaphone and sort of shouting down those who have a different belief system. And if you're watching this and you're completely triggered by what I've been saying, all I have to say is I love you, and that I pray for the freedom that is your birthright, to come and to fill your life and to lift you a place where you truly love everyone the same. What resonates for me is loving everyone the same. And when I take this core teaching of loving everyone the same, this core philosophy, and I then look at life, I look at what's unfolding through this lens of love everyone the same, and I ask myself, is capitalism about loving everyone the same? No, it's not. It's about profit. It's about the bottom line, separating us. And that ultimately we have an opportunity, when we view these tools, these philosophies, the expressions of these collectives, we have an opportunity to turn to truth and to ask, to seek within the idea of thy will be done. Well, then pause. And I like to pause and to ask, well, what is thy will? I am presence. That part of me that is the divine spark in every being, every particle of life. And so I'm going to leave you with that. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Like, do you agree? Do you see this differently? You may have profound disagreement with what I'm saying, and that's okay. We each have our own experiences, and there's nothing in what I'm saying that's in any way denying your experience. I'm just expressing my experience. I'm expressing my belief system, and one of the core beliefs that I have is that we are here to love everyone the same. And that means when there is iniquity, whether it's a system, a philosophy, or an institution that leads to iniquity, that leads to dear souls not being treated the same, not being accorded the respect and dignity, then there's something iniquitous in that, and that's not in alignment with loving everyone the same. And what I celebrate is that there is an expanding realization. And I'm going to come back to this in future videos because there's so much to talk about. Cosmic fire, love and blessings.